Hey everyone, if you'd like to watch an extended version of this Nirvana playlist video, please consider signing up for my Patreon page. You can watch all of my videos commercial-free, and since I don't have to cater to YouTube's Content ID system, I can go more in depth. Appreciate the support either way, now enjoy the video. Alright, well Nirvana won our last Patreon poll. Huge thank you to all my patrons for voting, and to those of you who suggested them in the first place. And it looks like this playlist series is finally stepping into the 90s. And really, what rock band better encapsulates the 90s than Nirvana? When this Seattle band broke through the endless hair metal videos on MTV, nobody saw it coming. They brought rock and roll out of the excessive spectacle and back down to its raw punk and even bluesy roots. And much like Cream or Hendrix, their career was very short-lived, at least their recording career. They released 3 studio albums, Bleach, Nevermind, and In Utero. Technically, Incesticide came after Nevermind, but that was more a compilation of singles, B-sides, and outtakes. Sadly, I feel like a dark cloud hangs over their legacy due to Kurt Cobain's tragic suicide, his offstage battle as a reluctant rock star, and yeah. For this compilation, I really just want to focus on their music. I feel that's really what needs to be remembered. And even though we're now in the CD age, we're still going to format this like it's a vinyl record. No longer than 26 minutes a side, with 6 bonus tracks at the end. So, take your time, hurry up, choice is yours, just don't be late for this Nirvana playlist. Okay, so we should start with their first album, Bleach, released in 1989. But to be completely honest with you, most of these songs I really prefer when they performed them live, particularly at the Paramount Theater in Seattle, Washington on Halloween 1991, which was only weeks after Nevermind had come out. And it's not that I dislike Bleach, I love how raw it is, definitely has that indie vibe of the time, but most of the songs kind of come off as demos, including the album's most famous track, About a Girl. Certainly the most poppy of the songs, and that's because Kurt Cobain wrote it after listening to Meet the Beatles, also with a bit of an REM influence.
I've always loved the Beatles. I like that old 60s pop kind of sound.
Kurt was very reluctant to include About a Girl on Bleach, feeling it would have alienated their alternative fan base, you know. Writing pop songs wasn't exactly cool. But I think it's the juxtaposition of the darker lyrics that makes the song unique and differentiate from the Beatles or REM. Krist Novoselic is playing bass, but on the studio version, Dave Grohl has not yet joined the band.
I was the 5th drummer of Nirvana.
That's Chad Channing playing on most of Bleach, who did come up with some innovative parts, even Dave attests to that. The problem is, his drumming doesn't really groove for me. It doesn't have that crack. And apparently he wanted to be more involved in the songwriting process, so his days became numbered. Dave Grohl's band Scream had just broken up, so the timing was right, and the 3 of them just clicked immediately. When you hear the sheer power of Dave's drumming come in for this exciting live rendition of About a Girl from the Paramount, the difference is night and day. Maybe it's because they'd been playing it for quite a while and really honed their craft, but in listening to Dave's drumming on the live version of About a Girl, as opposed to the studio version, he really is their power. He's Nirvana's John Bonham. The live at the Paramount version is getting my vote for the first song on this playlist. Same thing with their rendition of School, another highlight from Bleach, and another one that benefits from Dave's explosive fills without losing its raw nature. This definitely feels more in line with that alternative punk vibe of the time. There's no poppy melody, no story-driven lyrics, it's just pure anger. The lyrics are as follows: "Won't you believe it, it's just my luck, no recess, and you're in high school again." I think a lot of people can identify with this rebellious angst against high school. It's no secret that Kurt was heavily bullied in school, and you can definitely hear him exercising some demons in that screaming melody. School is loud, it's heavy, it's rebellious, and I love it. Here's a standalone single from 1990 they released called Sliver. This one leans more into the pop realm. The melody is almost like a children's song. Even the lyrics come off as a story as told by a child, being dumped off at his grandparents and crying for his grandma to take him home. It's a really fun song, and Chris's opening bass line is very memorable. This time we have Dan Peters of Mudhoney playing drums. This is a perfect example of Nirvana's sense of humor, showing that they weren't just this depressing grunge band, although this vibe really does foreshadow what's to come. And come it did in 1991, Nevermind, arguably the most famous album of the 90s, and now seen as being one of the greatest albums ever. Do I even need to tell you how it starts? Yes, Smells Like Teen Spirit was the song that reinvented the whole landscape of popular music for the early 90s. I'm sure the hardcore fans would consider the song way too overplayed to even include on this list, but come on, I'm a child of the 90s. You really think I'm not gonna include Smells Like Teen Spirit from those iconic 4 chords? To that explosive drum fill Dave Grohl plays, it never lets up. There's something about Kurt's scream that makes you feel it in the chest. It feels more reminiscent of the old blues screamers like Howlin' Wolf, rather than the flashy hair metal singers that have been dominating rock and roll up to that point. It is of course a running joke that no one can understand Kurt's lyrics. Weird Al made his parody all about that. I've sang it a number of times live, so I do know what all the words are, but I still really can't tell you what they're about. I'm sure everybody has their own interpretation, but I don't think they're really meant to be about anything.
We don't consciously think about our music, so we can't explain it. Therefore, interviews are worthless.
I do know that the origin of the title came from Bikini Kill singer Kathleen Hanna, who had been spending the night with Kurt.
She wrote, "Kurt smells like Teen Spirit." And it turns out she just meant I smelled like the deodorant.
Antiperspirant made for you and your generation. Teen Spirit.
It really does have that stream of consciousness style, like Kurt just jotted down whatever thought was in his head. I think he was focusing more on the lyrics flowing with the melody, and they really do. And I can't leave out Butch Vig's production. He just knew how to get such a huge sound out of this raw performance, like the band is right there in the room with you. I still maintain that this is the gold standard for how a rock and roll record should sound. Case in point, In Bloom. Another classic, and a bit more upbeat. It's another song highlighted by Dave's drums, but actually the fill was Chad's invention.
If you listen to a song like In Bloom, that's Chad.
Apparently the song was influenced by the Bad Brains Reignition, which you can definitely hear in the song. I've always kind of looked at the verses and choruses as two separate ideas, unless it's all meant to make up some sort of Rite of Spring type story. I've read it's making fun of these mainstream macho types that would come to their concerts and not understand what the point of the music was, maybe just looking to get laid, knows not what it means. Because of the dynamics and vocals, and because Kurt didn't always cooperate in the recording process, Butch had to adjust the gain on his microphone on the fly.
He didn't like doing double tracks, so I had to use the John Lennon reference, and every time he resisted, I said, "John Lennon did it." He'd go, "Okay."
And again, it's just a surprisingly catchy track, and still unique in its relation to the melody and its chord structure. I mean, the turnaround melody is basically chromatic. Spring is here again. But the chords turn it into a relative fifth, an octave, and a relative third. So it sounds like this. Reproductive glands. Hey! If I had to pick a favorite song from the album, it would be Come As You Are. Maybe my favorite Nirvana song, period. The opening guitar was fed through a small clone pedal to give off that distinct chorus sound. The guitar is tuned down a whole step, although, fun fact, I always played it by lowering the E and A strings down to D and G respectively. I used to lecture all my friends in school who were playing it a whole step higher about the proper way to play Come As You Are. It's probably why I was never very popular in school. This is one song I really can't give a definitive analysis of its allure. There's something about the way it flows, musically, lyrically. It's like moving meditation with heavy guitars and drums.
You don't think that people that are fans of you would like to hear what you had in mind, maybe, or what you were?
Hear what they have have in mind, you know, or how they interpret it.
I remember when I was in high school, which is really when I was listening to this album proper, playing this track on my CD player late at night as I was kind of falling asleep, my headphones blasting, I was staring at the back of the CD case, and just feeling some sense of ease by this. It's like Kurt is saying to us, it's okay to just be, come as you are. As an aspiring guitar player who was really into guys like Stevie Ray Vaughan, I always used to look down on Kurt for just copying the melodies for his guitar solos. It's one thing I always preferred with Pearl Jam, even though Kurt was very critical about their solos. Nowadays, I think it adds to that hypnotic nature of the song. To close side one of this compilation, we're actually going to skip to the end of Nevermind with Something in the Way. God, this song is so dark, yet so sublime. It's another one that really gives you a glimpse of the music that's to come. It's the darkest, most somber tune on the album, portraying the protagonist as homeless, living under the bridge, not to be confused with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and living off the land. While the myth of Kurt himself living homeless under the Yonge Street Bridge in Aberdeen has been debated, Kurt did apparently run away from home as a teenager, and he's definitely recounting some personal experience here. Honestly though, I interpret the song to be something in his own head, his depression, anxiety, something I can identify with, that unfortunately would claim his life years later. I've just never heard another song like this, one that makes you feel like you're inside the writer's tortured mind. And I think it's because it's so raw. Kurt tried recording it with Chris and Dave, but ended up performing it for Butch Vig on the couch of the studio control room. Butch mic'd his guitar and voice right there in the room, and the rest of the band recorded around his take, including cellist Kurt Canning. It's a dark but emotional way to end Nevermind and the first side of this playlist. But we're not done with Nevermind yet. We're going to go back to track 7 to start off side 2. Chris sings the Youngbloods Get Together in an ironic manner. In fact, he mockingly sang a lot of old covers during Nirvana's concert, and this is followed by Feedback and the opening riff to Territorial Pissings. It's very punk in that regard. Kind of reminds me of when The Clash sang Phony Beatlemania Has Bitten the Dust. In this case, I think Kurt's suggesting that the peace and love dream still hasn't been realized, and maybe it can't be realized. There's also the line, never met a wise man, if so it's a woman, which obviously points to Kurt's hardcore feminist beliefs. But my favorite line is, just because you're paranoid, don't mean they're not after you. And the way the feedback creeps in when he says that, oof, it's so good. Again, what I love about the track on the album is that it breaks things up from the darker tracks. Despite the lyrics still being somewhat pessimistic, it's still high energy. Same can be said for On a Plane, another tune hugely influenced by the Beatles. That melody will never leave your head once you hear it. The lyrics were actually finished on the fly, which is why it seems to break the lyrical fourth wall. I'll start this off without any words, what the hell am I trying to say, and the final verse, one more special message to go, and then I'm done, and I can go home. I also love Dave's harmonies, sung in fifths, which are heard a cappella as the band is faded out. Kurt would actually be very critical of this album's mix, this song in particular, feeling it was too polished. Personally, I think it's a perfect blend of raw performance and unique production techniques, but for their next album, Nirvana would change things up considerably. By the time In Utero was in production, a lot had happened. Nevermind had gone platinum, Nirvana was the biggest name in music, and Kurt really resented it.
There's nothing more embarrassing than a group of people walking up to you and shaking and clamoring and praising you like you're some kind of fucking god or something.
So it makes sense that they wanted to go back to their indie roots for 1993's In Utero, produced by Steve Albini.
The In Utero album was done fairly quickly. We were done in 12 or 14 days.
It doesn't sound like Nirvana in the studio. It sounds like Nirvana in the room.
There were also disagreements over splitting royalties. They had simply shared writing credits on Nevermind, but now Kurt demanded a higher percentage as being the sole writer. But on In Utero, Dave Grohl got the chance to preview his skills as a songwriter with the song Scentless Apprentice.
Dave came up with the drum beat, and then he showed me the riff, you know? And I was thinking, this is kind of boneheaded, and then I thought, we'll work on it, and it turned out great.
It kind of reminds me of Little Miss Lover by Jimi Hendrix, especially with Dave's repeating drum pattern, which really drives the song. When you listen to the song, you can definitely hear how different it sounds compared to Nevermind. And you thought the words to Smells Like Teen Spirit were unintelligible? Good luck with this one. Still, again, I think it shows a different side of Nirvana, and it's interesting to hear the progression of Dave Grohl's songwriting, considering what he would later do with the Foo Fighters. Of course, the real hit from this album is Heart-Shaped Box. Just like Come As You Are, you hear that opening guitar line and instantly know what it is. I've read so many interpretations about this song that it's about kids with cancer in response to an actual interview Kurt gave about the song. But you do know the song is called Heart-Shaped Box, right? Like, we all know what that means, right? Courtney Love has claimed the song was written for her, specifically her vagina, and also recounts him writing the song in the closet of their home. When he sings Eat Your Cancer, I think he's referring to Courtney's astrological sign. But again, lyrically, I think there's a number of ideas Kurt construed together. And if the song really is directed at Courtney, it's not exactly the most endearing. It definitely brings us back to the darkness in terms of vibe, and the video was certainly a surreal experience. But again, there's something about the dynamics, the way it builds tension and then explodes on the chorus that is so enticing. Before we talk about a couple more songs off In Utero, I want to have a look at the band's landmark MTV Unplugged concert from November 18th, 1993.
It might be nice to start playing acoustic guitars and be thought of as a singer and a songwriter rather than a grunge rocker. Then I might be able to take advantage of that when I'm older and sit down on a chair and play acoustic guitar like Johnny Cash or something, you know?
They were not the first to popularize the program, but their show has gone down in history as an era-defining event. And a big part of that is because they didn't want to just treat it as a gig at Madison Square Garden played with acoustic guitars. They didn't even want to play their hits. They didn't play Teen Spirit. They didn't play Lithium. They didn't even play Heart-Shaped Box, their current single. Nah, they elected for more deeper cuts and obscure covers. One of these was a David Bowie song, The Man Who Sold the World, the title track of his 1970 album. The original is dark to begin with, but also contains semi-contemporary psychedelic rock production.
I remember it was at a time when I was sort of studying Buddhism, for my 15 minutes of Buddhism.
The lyrics may be self-directed, pointing at Bowie's desire to hide his identity behind the many characters he played. But with Nirvana, it seems to take on a whole different meaning. The arrangement, while similar, is obviously more stripped down. Though it's curious that Kurt is using a fuzz pedal on his acoustic guitar for this unplugged concert. I've always felt Kurt's interpretation was also self-reflecting, the man who sold the world referring to his identity as a reluctant rock star. It became even more haunting after Kurt had died, especially when he sings the line, "I thought you died a long, long time ago." It's like Kurt was already feeling this disconnect from life.
It really had two mystical states, the time that I wrote it and recorded it and the time when he recorded it, and the things that led up to his end after that.
By this point, Pat Smear had joined as their second guitarist, along with cellist Laurie Goldston. They add a lot of depth to the band's arrangements, especially that ghost-like cello. And maybe one of Kurt's most revealing songs is Dumb, originally from In Utero, but the unplugged version is even more emotional. This song had existed since 1990 and has a similar darker feel to Something in the Way, albeit with more moving parts and energy. The cello in the chorus really gives off this feeling of doom and gloom.
I kind of envy people who are blissfully happy, and a lot of those people aren't bothered with the complications of knowledge and everything else that life has to offer.
You read these lyrics, it's obviously about using drugs to cope with depression and self-loathing. While I never touched heroin in my life, as far as you all know, The line, "I think I'm dumb," is definitely one that has entered my mind when I'm feeling really insecure. And to hear Kurt convey these same feelings, it's very cathartic. Like, you think, oh my god, somebody else out there feels these same feelings I do. I think that's why Kurt Cobain, whether he liked it or not, was the voice of a generation. We'll close out side 2 with the unplugged rendition of All Apologies, also from In Utero, the last track in fact. It became the second single released from the album, and they ended up using the unplugged performance as the music video. It's not a perfect version, there's a couple notes Kurt sings which are obviously off key, but it does create that raw vibe that Kurt was looking for. Like Come As You Are, that repeating riff is so soothing, and lyrically, I have to admit All Apologies feels more positive to me. I mean, it's not a happy song, and a lot of people have interpreted it to be Kurt's final goodbye before he died, but I don't know about that. I think it's just more that stream of consciousness he was famous for, like each line is its own short poem. Maybe one of the more famous lines is "Everyone is gay." Kurt was famously opposed to homophobia, especially in rock and roll.
I even thought that I was gay. I thought that might be the solution to my problem during my high school years.
For me personally, the final mantra, harmonized by Dave, is the perfect way to end this playlist. Whether intentional or not, Kurt does make this sound like his final message to the world that we're all still singing to this day. Even my own Peace Elements, I'm sure, was very influenced by All Apologies. Anyway, that's the main playlist. Let's talk bonus tracks. And I'll actually include a studio track off of Bleach this time. Their first song, actually. A cover of Shocking Blue's Love Buzz. Shocking Blue might be most famous for originating the song Venus. Honestly, their original version of Love Buzz doesn't do much for me. Kinda sounds like a poor man's Jefferson Airplane song. Nirvana's version still includes that signature bass intro, but the dynamics emitted from Kurt's guitars give the song more oomph. It may actually be some of Kurt's best guitar playing. It's also notable that Kurt changes the chorus from "Can you hear my love buzz" to "Can you feel my love buzz?" I think that makes it a lot clearer. And they do a kick-ass version of it at the Paramount, but I felt I should include something from the original album. What I will include from the Paramount is their live version of Blue, the first song off of Bleach. It also begins with a bass intro, and in fact Krist Novoselic had called Blue his favorite song off of Bleach. That's probably what put it over me including Negative Creep or Floyd the Barber. Blue just seems more inventive to me. And again, the reason the live version overtakes the studio cut is because of Dave Grohl's drum fills. I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of flack from this, but I've never been that big on the song Lithium. Don't get me wrong, I still like it, hence why I'm including it as a bonus track. I might have even included it in place of Scentless Apprentice, but I felt like I was including too many Nevermind songs. Regardless of why it never really struck me as a kid, I can definitely see why so many people love it. It's catchy, it's got a groove, and apparently it was one of the few Nirvana tunes people could dance to. In this respect, it might be their poppiest song, and apparently Kurt wrote the entire song in one sitting rather than taking bits and pieces here and there. In its simplest form, Kurt said it was about a man who's lost his love and finds religion as a coping mechanism. Good song, just never really hit me in the same way. As I said before, Incesticide was the first follow-up to Nevermind, a collection of outtake singles and B-sides, which David Geffen released for Christmas of '92. One of these songs was Aneurysm, which had been released as the B-side to Teen Spirit. It's definitely an adventurous song, jamming a full minute 18 before Kurt finally starts singing lyrics about sex and drugs. There's a lot going on in the song, the tempo changes to ever-changing guitar and vocal hooks. Definitely worth checking out. Rape Me from In Utero. Yeah, this caused quite the controversy when it came out.
It's let me repeat that, anti-rape song.
Like Lithium, this one never quite struck me the same as it did for others, and it's not because I'm offended by it or anything, it just didn't really grab me like Heart-Shaped Box or Dumb. Still an oddly catchy tune, the chord sequence is actually just the inverted chords to Teen Spirit. As for the lyrics, I'm just gonna let Kurt explain it.
People didn't understand when we wrote a song like about a girl or Polly. I decided to write Rape Me in a way that was just so blunt and obvious that it's like no one could deny it, you know? No one could read into it any other way.
We'll finish off with the Leadbelly cover that closed the MTV Unplugged concert, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? Kurt's screaming rendition of Leadbelly's song is dynamic, emotional, and sad. When the concert finished and the band was asked to perform an encore, Kurt said, "I can't top that," which means Nirvana finished on top. As always, there's a link to a streaming playlist in the description below. And what are your favorite Nirvana songs? Comment below, let me know. And I'll be sure to add another Patreon poll soon. But for now, we're gonna go ahead and finish up Pink Floyd album reviews, so I'll see you then.